got ourselves an X-Men fan. Maybe a quarter of it happened, and not like this. In the real world, people die.
Logan.
I don't want to talk about it.
Logan.
Just stop.
Be careful. I need the girl.
What girl?
Go get her. No. 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 You still have time.
Holy cow, it's another film board from the next reel on rashpixel.fm. We take on new movies released in your local theater, and we are back and reassembled with a gang of thugs not 6 days removed from our last film board to cut up and spoil the new angry and angsty delinquent cousin of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We all watched Logan this week, and I think I'm still reeling from the taste of blood. This week, we've shuffled our deck a little bit to freshen up the spoilage, so let me introduce you to tonight's hosts. Our own, this first father figure for this show. Hello, Pete Wright.
I'm like you. I'm very much like you.
And then we have the celebrated master of deep cuts, Steve Sarmento.
It's good to be back.
And we're going to go back to the well another week here with special guest host Darnell Smith. Hello.
Hello. Are we doing Patrick Stewart impersonations?
The line must be drawn here. No further.
I don't know, but they're really good. I need to reintroduce you all as Patrick Stewart. Darnell, would you call yourself a Pulp Fiction fanatic? And I'm not talking about the movie, but the genre in particular.
You know, I wouldn't call myself that, but I think pulpy stories really speak to me. Going back to like Flash Gordon, but not like the old version of Flash Gordon, like the 80s Flash Gordon, Big Trouble in Little China, like all those sorts of adventure kind of crazy stories with saving damsels and mustache twirling villains. That all speaks to me. So I would say yes, because I think so.
Yeah, I was trying to kind of put it in a little box there, but I think this one is going to be a good one.
Absolutely.
For you.
Oh boy.
All you folks hanging out with us at home should remember to check out the fun facts about this show and its sibling shows at thenextreel.com. Go subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app and follow us on Twitter and Facebook at The Next Reel. If this is your first time checking in with us, look back through our show feed for loads of content about hundreds, and I mean literally hundreds of films. Find your favorites and tell us how you like the show, and after that, tell a friend, because we like your friends too. Okay, let's claw our way into Logan, gentlemen. Initial thoughts, Pete. I want to start off with a hypothetical. Which is the bigger movie parent mistake? This one, Logan, or Kingsman?
Oh, Kingsman. Yeah, I still think Kingsman. You know
Really?
what? Yeah, because this one was great, but predictable violence. Like you know what you're gonna get. And Kingsman was let's just say it was creative. In the violence, and of course there was that last line that I had to end up explaining to my 11-year-old. So, there are reasons.
But you didn't bring your 11-year-old to this.
Alas, I did not. I brought you, and so I have to tell you my initial thoughts. The first two acts of the movie gave me exactly what I wanted. The third act gave me less than what I wanted, but still wasn't terrible. So I walked away feeling pretty darn good about this movie.
Well, that's good. Steve, you did bring a child to this movie, right?
Okay. Well, she's 14 years old, and so she presented strong counter arguments to the reasons it was rated R, because I looked on IMDb to find out why it was rated R. And I said, well, it says there's some nudity. It said, there's a scene where this woman pulls down her top. She said, Dad, I've got boobs. I see boobs all the time. Nothing new for me. I said, okay, well, the other issue is, says lots of bloody violence. And she looked at me and said, Dad, every month.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I can't argue with that. I can't argue with that. Exactly. So we went. We both had a really good time. She cried 3 times during the movie, and I really enjoyed what I'm considering sort of a 21st century Western here. It was very enjoyable.
Oh, that's cool. I want to talk about that a little bit too. I hadn't really thought about it that way, so that's really interesting. Darnell, we are fathers of boys, so I don't know that it's as much of a concern, especially since yours is grown. But it's kind of the type of movie that we were talking about before, right? How did you feel about it?
Yeah, I agree. Where I really loved it. Kind of along those lines, though, when I was watching the film, I just got LASIK surgery, and my doctor was like, put artificial tears in. And at certain points in the movie, I was like, oh no, he didn't say anything about real tears. So I just stifle a cry. And at the very end of the film, the person sitting next to me starts sobbing. And of course, that makes me tear up a little bit. And I look over, and it was an 11-year-old girl wearing an oversized Marvel ball cap. And her dad is holding her, and she's just sobbing in this film. And so I wish I could emote like her openly in public, because this film was the perfect elegy for these characters. It's a good way, if you're going to go out swinging, this is a good way for Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart to end this 18-year run with these characters. I loved it.
That's awesome. And I think, for me, I think, Pete, what you brought up about the different acts is interesting for me. The first couple acts were definitely a departure from what we've seen, even from this somewhat separate from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think for me, the pacing was a little off, but only because I wasn't ready for it. I don't think it hindered the movie in any way. I think it made it different. And that's something that was difficult for me to accept. I think it's really interesting that we're talking about how this movie is effective or scary or difficult for children. And there may be a thing to talk about in the difference between girls and boys watching this movie and the comic book nature of it, especially because of the relationship they're putting on there. In general, I thought it was a really strong film and a really strong choice. So I think I kind of want to start there with the idea of the hard R. And Pete mentioned that he and I walked into this movie together. And one of the big things that I was coming to the movie with was everybody talked about that this was going to be a hard R movie, and I wanted to make sure that they did that. And boy, did they. This was bloody. It even made me feel like a Tarantino movie. Darnell, you said there was an 11-year-old girl nearby. Did that hit you strange at all? The gore, the graphic nature of the film?
It did a little bit. Yeah, my first thought was like, oh, this adorable little girl. My second thought was like, oh my God, there was kids slaughtering other adults in this film. And I mean, it was incredibly graphic. But I tell you what, like, it felt right for the first time for this character. I felt like I've always felt, even going back to the original X-Men, and I remember a scene in X2 where Wolverine fights off a bunch of people who invade the mansion. And it was just like, this is an R-rated character sitting in a PG-13 movie. So yeah. God, it finally felt right for him to, to swear and to slice people's faces off, and it, I liked it that way. But yes, it's definitely not for the child Marvel fans.
I absolutely had that feeling as soon, and I thought specifically back to X2 when he sort of pinions that guy against the freezer, right? That's the sequence that I find most exhilarating, and that's what makes X2 the better movie for me, is that I feel like we get a hint of who Logan needs to be in the series. And this movie absolutely capitalized on that. And so I kind of walked out with a regret. Like, to your point, this is a beautiful cap to this 18-year relationship we've had with these characters. And yet my regret is I wish we could have gotten this one earlier. Why didn't we get Deadpool 6 years ago, so we could really explore who Logan is as a result? I mean, I see these as directly linked, right? As one begets the other. And so, I'm right with you. This is the Logan I've wanted all along, and it's why the first two acts work so well for me.
That's cool. Steve, you mentioned that your daughter had these reasons why it's okay. Did you feel like it was okay?
I think with this one, in terms of the violence, we talked about it when we got out of it, about how, sort of bloody and gory it was. And for her, actually, it was, I think it's the first R-rated movie she's seen. For her, it was really about the swearing that was really, sort of shocking, because she said, okay, a couple times she's like, but then like the 9th or 10th time, she's like, really, is that necessary? But then she said she thought about it, and Logan is this character. She said, he drinks a lot and he's got a lot of rage and anger, and that makes sense for that character. So for her, that was the shocking thing about it, was just the swearing. It's not not something she's, exposed to a lot. Although she's in high school, I'm sure she's heard it a lot. But I think perhaps it was Patrick Stewart swearing, because she's, grown up with him as Jean-Luc Picard, who does not swear. In terms of the violence, she said, well, I haven't seen The Hateful Eight or The Revenant or anything. So she's figuring those are probably worse and bloodier. She's involved in theater at school, so does a lot of makeup. So for her, she often sort of switches into analytical mode. So there's, for example, the scene where he's at the doctor, and you see that his sort of abdomen is just totally, just torn apart. And she looked at that as sort of like, okay, the prosthetics for that, how would I do that? So for her, she was able to sort of take herself into the analytical movie maker side of that to say, okay, this isn't real. Let's think about that. But there was definitely a lot of oohs and ahs as we were getting, claws through skulls through several scenes of it was hitting her on a very visceral level, I think, but not to the extent where I think it was gratuitous. I think she saw it in the sense of, here's a person. And we had a very interesting discussion about one of the other characters, and, we can started jumping into the story here when he fights X-24. And she said for her, that was a very upsetting scene because she sees Logan fighting basically the younger version of himself, the version that's, fueled by rage and violence. And to see him battling that, she took that as sort of this internal struggle of the older Logan battling his younger self and who he's become. And for her, she said that was more disturbing on the fact of his own personal struggles of having to be confronted with his own flaws. Because there's some brutal violence in those fight scenes, but it wasn't so much about the violence, but of the fact of this character struggling against himself and what the battle that was going on internally, which I thought, I guess I'm doing a good job of parenting because we're analyzing things at this level. Right. So it wasn't it wasn't anything that was, disturbing or shocking to her that she's expressed to me. We did talk a lot about it before and after, but, I think a lot of the violence fits with what's going on in this story. That's why I say it is a 21st century Western. There's a lot of fighting going on, but I think it's I guess to say justified within the context of the story and the conflicts that the characters are facing.
Well, yeah, and those actually sound like story points to me rather than sort of, like you say, the gratuitous graphic nature of it, which kind of goes back to what you were saying, Pete, in that that this is the movie that kind of needed to be made. I think we all kind of felt the same way about Deadpool when it came out, as it's a departure from the sort of regular menu that we were being handed from comic book movies for a long time. We've talked about on the show before how DC tends to trend to the dark or try to create a dark universe. And, I'll admit my bias freely here that I'm a big Marvel kid as opposed to a DC kid growing up. And I like this brand of darkness better than what's been going on in the DC universe, because I think this is more creatively done. And again, I love Deadpool and I like what they're doing here because I think they're embracing the characters and what they're meant to do. It feels in concert with what was originally in the source material. And so what I hear you saying, Pete, and what I think is the direction here is that they're trying to, with this new mutant cinematic universe, if it's separate from the Marvel cinematic universe, create something that's different and really take a look at the different ways that they can make a comic book movie and make it special, making it like a Western, like you're talking about, Steve. So I think that's interesting. What did you guys think about that in terms of the departure and how it differs from other comics out there?
Well, I agree with that sentiment. I think one of the things they do well is that, this is R-rated because this character lends itself to it. Like Deadpool lends itself to it. And going back to that analogy, when they make a dark and gritty Superman, it's like, well, that doesn't work because Superman is sunny and happy and full of hope. And so I think that this worked for the R-rated feel, really worked because this is it wasn't quite post-apocalyptic, but it was just a version of America, which sadly feels a little too familiar, but also is just a little dark and grim. It's a version of America where you do want to just drink whiskey and curse a lot and forget about your troubles.
Yeah, and in reading on the sort of definition of where this is coming from, the source material, the Old Man Logan series, this is the first time I think in the Marvel movies that we're getting what was originally seen as an alternative universe or an alternative timeline. Did any of you guys actually read the Old Man Logan books?
It's funny, I'm reading it right now in prep for this movie. Like around Christmas time, Marvel had a huge sale, so I bought up a bunch of Old Man Logan. And this is very loosely based on that. Old Man Logan is insane. I mean, there are like hillbilly Hulk children and all sorts of crazy things. But it has that same ultra-violent feel as well as that same exhausted Logan. And I think this movie... I think those similarities are really well done and really well matched, and it's a good thing to see that on screen.
Yeah, I definitely I've seen some panels from the book, and it looks graphic and gory as well. So that's kind of if it's taken and even if it's just loosely based in adaptation, I think that what they've done with the script here and what they've done with the story, and even how the film was directed, it was definitely embracing that and taking that on there. So in terms of the direction, James Mangold, how did you guys feel about what he brought to the show here?
I think about the other stuff that I know of Mangold, and I find myself sort of going back and forth between being sort of perplexed, when I think about Girl Interrupted, and baffled when I think about Wolverine, and yet at the same time, I look at something like Walk the Line and I think, there's an interesting sort of Western vibe to the way he approached these two movies. And I see, honestly, more sort of character similarities between Logan and Walk the Line than I do between Logan and the Wolverine, which I think is pretty telling. Well,
and that's what I was going to ask. I guess this is the first time for us to bring that up here in the show, is that he directed the Wolverine too. And I feel like these characters, we brought up the idea of this possibly being an alternative universe, but it doesn't really feel the same. It feels a lot different, even from a film perspective. I don't see a whole lot of connection between these two movies.
Well, I feel like the Wolverine wanted to be like, they got to do with Logan what they want to do with the Wolverine. But, the studio at the time, they were like, we don't do R-rated. But I really felt like Mangold and Hugh Jackman were trying to go for something a little tougher, and they were doing it in different ways. Like, hey, Hugh Jackman, like, get really jacked. And, and we'll kind of have a little sex scene. It'd kind of be a little dark. But then at the end of the day, they just didn't go far enough. And we got a really mediocre film. So it was nice to see them be able to do a do-over. My biggest worry going into this film was that we would get another sort of the Wolverine and there would be like a big CGI fight at the end. And I'm really glad that this was really grounded and very character based going into like Walk the Line or Girl Interrupted. They really went character first, plot second. There's a lot of plot points where you're like, I don't even know what happened or how we got to this point, and it kind of doesn't matter because I really care about how Xavier and Logan are feeling right now.
That gets right to the point about how the film opens, right? I mean, there is no direct connection to, Logan of past and Logan of 2029. He's just passed out in the back of his car, of his limo, and that's all you get. And I found that actually surprisingly gratifying. And yet another sign that Marvel is sort of wrapping their heads around, we can make superhero movies that are a different vibe. It goes back to Winter Soldier and how much that was such a great sort of spy thriller in this year. And this, here we have a great sort of Western, it's I think that's telling. It's interesting when you go back. I don't want to belabor the DC comparison too much because Lord knows we've done that too much on the show as is, but we have trouble with Superman as a dark film because Superman, the character, doesn't lend himself to being quite so dark, but Batman is arguably the darkest of the dark, and they screwed that up. Right. So I think that's interesting, and I'm the one who was bullish on Batman. I think I liked it of all of us probably the most, and I still wasn't that crazy about it. So
sure.
I think that's interesting, and I think this film, Logan in particular, really really highlights the difference in approaches probably more than any other film we've seen to date.
Well, now wait. Now you said that Marvel's behind this. Are these not Fox movies?
Well, this is also a Marvel movie.
Well, Marvel now has interesting IP rights to all of the characters.
Correct.
But at one point, it wasn't that way, and all of the
By
mutants
Fox.
were held by Fox.
Right.
The reason why I ask is because of the point that Darnell made about, I was going to ask if we're comfortable calling this a do-over, because we look at the Wolverine, and then before that, we have X-Men Origins Wolverine, which are both... They're both subpar when you can compare it to what we're talking about now. And if in X-Men Origins Wolverine, you actually have Ryan Reynolds playing a mute Deadpool, which makes terribly little sense when you consider who Deadpool is in the source material. But so those were kind of false starts, I guess, maybe. And I think of that as, the reason why I asked the difference between Marvel and Fox here is because it feels as if they are separate, which they might not be anymore, because we do have the big Marvel reel before these movies now. But if they are separate, they are creating somewhat of a subtle difference in what I just called the mutant cinematic universe from the Marvel cinematic universe. We have the two Quicksilvers in the X-Men story versus the Avengers story, who he died in Age of Ultron. But those kind of subtle parallel storytelling instances makes for an interesting conversation. I like the idea of calling this a do-over because I think they're doing it right now. And they used some of they used Ryan Reynolds for the new Deadpool. They're staying with Hugh Jackman, at least up until this point, for Logan. And I'm comfortable with that. I think I'm happy with their creative direction here. That was an interesting point. I don't know the detail of the IP. Do any of you guys know?
I don't know, but what I sort of draw the parallel to is you can look at the Wolverine as a standalone because it's not directly tied to any cinematic universe. You don't have any connection to any other Marvel characters that we see in either the Marvel cinematic universe or that were existing in the Fox universe. It's really a truly standalone Wolverine movie, which, I think in comic books often you'll get those, you'll get a spin-off or you'll get a side story. I mean, there's so many different universes and timelines and everything else that I don't necessarily think of Logan as a reboot. I think of the Wolverine as its own separate standalone Wolverine story. This, I can see some possible connections to the sort of rebooted Marvel X-Men, whatever we want to call it, where they started with X-Men First Class, and then we ended up with Days of Future Past, where we had, Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier and things going on. And we do have references to an event that happened that, and the X-Men and mutants seem to have disappeared. So it's possible to tie into that universe. But I'm going to push back on reboot and just say we're at a point, I think, where we can have multiple stories about characters just as readers are familiar with, well, I can pick up this Iron Man comic book or this Wolverine, and I've also got this X-Men story, and I don't have to, think through and reconcile, well, where does this fall in reference to the others, and does this information contradict the other? I can accept this as a story that's being told as is and go with it. And if there are allusions to or references to other materials, such as here where they talk about the Statue of Liberty, which we know was in the first X-Men movie from 15 or so years ago, those that know that can connect to that. Just as in a comic book, if you're familiar with some of those storylines, it can enhance the story, but I don't think it's necessary. So I feel that I can look at the Wolverine as a standalone. I can look at this and any connections it may have to any other existing Marvel films and appreciate that, but I can also just accept this as a truly powerful story about these characters.
I think, yeah, and I don't want to belabor that point either, but I did speak incorrectly. I say Marvel and I say it a little bit flippantly, but you can't dismiss the fact that Marvel as a production house has done it right in so many ways, and that there is, I have a very hard time believing that these X-Men movies aren't directly influenced by the success and the strategy behind what Marvel has done. In fact, you end up looking at just look at Lauren Schuler Donner's upcoming credits, and we've got, after Logan, X-Men Supernova, X-Men The New Mutants, X-Force, Untitled X-Men Project, Gambit, Constantine 2, and Deadpool 2. I mean, these are this is the playbook, the Marvel playbook, and they are doing it at a speed, sort of a frenetic pace, but largely to capitalize, I think, on just the momentum of being able to test these characters in different waters, and I think that's something that Marvel has done very well, and I think they have learned, or are learning.
Yeah, my understanding is the history behind it is, back in the day before Marvel was Marvel, they licensed out X-Men properties to Fox and Spider-Man out to Sony, and so there's no creative overlap. Fox owns everything X-Men related. That's why we get to see all these spin-offs, and even FX's show on Legion is a Fox production. But Marvel, which is now owned by Disney, has no creative control over that. Sony did, after being unable to make a good Spider-Man film, they did relinquish some creative control back over to Kevin Feige's Marvel division with Spider-Man. So Spider-Man Homecoming is a joint production between Disney and Sony.
That's why we got Spider-Man in the latest
exactly
movie, yeah.
Exactly, and it's also why I'm glad they weren't able to do this, but the Old Man Logan story involves Hulk, Hawkeye, all these other
Spider-Man,
characters. Spider-Man, yeah, Mysterio, the Spider-Man villain, is a major part of the storyline. So you won't see, they don't say mutants in Avengers properties or on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the TV show. They can't use the word mutants, so they use Inhumans, and so there's not that crossover. But I think what Fox learned, and it was a hard lesson, because going back to the stuff that Ryan Reynolds had to do to get Deadpool made, I mean, it cost nothing. He had to really lobby for it. They had to leak test footage online to get fans into it. And it really took a lot for Fox to learn, like, oh, we don't just have to make another Bryan Singer movie. We can kind of expand and do everything else. And I think in the same year, they learned Deadpool being a hit and X-Men Apocalypse being not so big of a hit. I think we'll now see them take a lot more risks with the X-Men property, which I'm really excited about.
What is it, Darnell? Do you know what the story is between their frequency rights? I mean, don't they have to put out an X-Men movie every certain number of years in order to maintain that relationship?
Yes, I don't know the time limit. It is every 3 or 4 years, and I think it's the same with Sony. Had to do the same with Spider-Man. If you don't put out a property, if you don't put something new out after a certain amount of years, the rights revert back to Marvel.
Which I think the change for that is these leases on characters used to be much longer, and why we end up getting sort of shoveled these properties is because of the unique relationship from Marvel, where they guaranteed like 3 or 4 years in between films. So you just have to always be making a movie, or we get it back.
That's why we got Andrew Garfield Spider-Man was Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire. That fourth one fell apart, and they were like, we got to make something. Yeah. And that's what they made.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you talk about the switch, or at least picking a lane for this side of the comic book universe, to say, you weigh the difference between Deadpool and X-Men Apocalypse, and you see that this is the way we can differentiate ourselves now, so let's go this route. I think that's great, and I think that it's interesting too to consider the fact that James Mangold has been a part of both what we're deciding, or what we're saying is now a standalone film in the Wolverine, because it's not necessarily attached, and now this, which is that lane and is that new sort of success that they're going. And I think it's interesting to show the differences in that, and I think he did some pretty amazing stuff in this. So talking about the first shot, last shot, I don't know that they're connected in particular, but I think this came from Steve, right? It's Logan in the limo, and then to the last shot of the X. Is that right?
First shot is sort of tricky, because we all got sort of fooled at the beginning of this movie, because when I thought it was starting, we got a little Deadpool thing at the beginning, which in retrospect I think was the wisest choice, because to have that play at the end of this movie would just completely undermine the emotional story we went through. So as I recall, I think it's him sleeping in the limo, because that first scene is him when the guys are trying to, basically steal the wheels off the car he's driving. I think, thematically something to look at is, the limo as sort of a hearse type capsule, possibly of, he's a loner out on his own, sort of confined and isolated. And that's sort of where we leave him at the end. I think it's reinforced by the powerful image of, Laura taking the cross out of the grave and then tilting it on its side to make an X, to, state that, he is an X-Men. So I think there's, sort of his, the arc that he takes is going from, isolation and denial. I mean, he was always sort of in that place, but even now more so, he's in complete isolation. There's no one left. I mean, even the mutants are gone as far as he knows, except for he and Charles. So it's going from complete isolation and being a loner to, now finding a place amongst sort of the heritage of what will be the next generation, the new generation of mutants that we see through this story, and the place that his story holds now as almost the foundation of that, as, the genetic forefather to some of them, and also I think as a spiritual leader for them, that he holds an important place. And to me, that was really the resonance of the story for Logan, was to go from, I'm just this old guy sort of grinding away at his job, trying to save up some money to go retire, which I think is, for me, when the first X-Men movie came out, being in your, early 30s to now, nearly, 16 or so years later, getting older, getting close to 50, and, your life is in a different place, to relate to Logan as the guy who's just like, I'm just getting through. I'm getting through a paycheck to save up some money to then just get out of here. And to be in that place, just to identify with that, and then to be confronted with, for lack of a better parallel, I look at these sort of new mutants almost as like the millennials, the next generation coming up, that Gen X itself sort of has to deal with and cope with.
Well, skewering that shopkeeper, Steve, that's such a millennial move. Like, really?
So it's
just taking things.
But to me, it's an interesting journey for him. And I think the First Shot, Last Shot captures that of, really being alone and having to fend for yourself, to now being, sort of celebrated in a certain way, because all those kids look up to him, and the sacrifice that he makes for them, of being willing to make that decision, from going from the place of, I don't want to have anything to do with any of this. I don't want to have anything to do with this kid. I just got to get Charles, get the money, get on the boat, and then I don't have to deal with anything, to putting his life on the line for that group of kids down at the border, is just, the transformation of that character. I mean, it's for me, I went back to look at who wrote the story and to see Scott Frank being involved in the story, but also knowing that he was involved with the Wolverine. And as I recall, we loved the first half of that movie, which seemed really, character driven piece. And I think it fell apart at the end, but here it was allowed to carry through, the title says it all. I mean, it's the Wolverine versus Logan. I mean, it's the personal story of, I think the Wolverine was, about the persona of the Wolverine. Here it's about Logan, the man, and what he goes through.
We see him, and he's already this sort of Lazarus man. He's dead in spirit. He's driving an Uber limo, drinking.
It would be Uber.
Yeah, and he doesn't care the first thing about heroics or anything. All his friends are dead. All he's waiting to do, which all these good types of movies, like Unforgiven, these type of movies, it's basically someone who's dead in spirit who needs one last thing to actually physically die. And I think there's a neat parallel with that. I also thought there was a neat parallel between where he is here and where he is in the first X-Men movie. And, Xavier mentions it. I met you were doing cage fights. And he was in the same sort of place where he's like, I don't want to be a hero. I'm all messed up. And he was forced to save a group of kids from bad guys. And so it was really neat to see him do it that one last time. And there was something, I cried at the end, I'm going to admit. And me and that 11-year-old girl, when Laura tilted that over to the X, it sort of signified, the last X-Men was dying, the death of the X-Men, kind of the grave for the entire group. And then to see that little boy who was standing with them, he's holding the little Wolverine doll, and it was just like, this is the death of an era, and not just the death of a single man. And I really like that. I'm almost like, I'm good without any more X-Men movies. Just for that.
Sorry, man. No,
yeah, that's not going to happen.
There are a couple of points. The first one is just latching onto the symbol, right? This is a franchise that has dealt with, man's comparison to gods, right? These are characters that have often been compared to sort of God walking in flesh because of their unique powers, and I think the symbol turn at the end is all that much more powerful. What is it that we worship in this context when you take the cross and you dismantle it in favor of this sort of manufactured symbol of these?
I love it.
Right, of these gods walking. That was one that I really latched onto and found very powerful, posed a very powerful question for me. But the other, to your point, Darnell, I think this is the first major death of a major character that we have yet seen, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the longest
universe, yes.
running sort of universe character that we've ever had, starting with his appearance in 2000, and to see him die both as a character in this film, but also as Hugh Jackman portraying him.
Right.
I think that is also a particularly powerful transition. I wonder, we already know that Xavier is coming back in the form of James McAvoy in upcoming X-Men, the New Mutants, etc.
Right.
But I don't think we're going to get a younger Wolverine again. I hope that we don't. I feel like we need this to pass and move on to this next generation. It'll make it that much better. I don't want to see a young Han Solo version of young Wolverine. I don't need that. So that I found was very
That's interesting
powerful.
that you say that. Yeah, and I think we're all generally accepting right now that this is the end for Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart in the franchise, but I don't know. I mean, they're leaving, because this is possible alternative universe timeline, they are leaving that door open. And I still remember when Wolverine first showed his head in X-Men Days of Futures Past, that was such a great surprise to have him show up there. So I think they're probably still holding on to, their cards a little bit with that, especially because there's been a whole lot of interaction between Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds in terms of potential love bro fest in the Deadpool stuff. So I think it still could happen, but it's interesting. I think they have created a very nice poem for those two guys with this franchise, if this is their end. Oh, and I also want to say, I am very comfortable with Wolverine being the avatar for Generation X. We glossed over that point, but if Generation X is dying with this movie, if Wolverine is our avatar, me as comic book fanboy, I'm like, yep, I'll take it. That's perfect for me.
That's exactly. So reluctant to serve, a little cynical.
Yeah,
hard to knock down.
Everybody loves him, but he's tossed to the side.
Weirdly manicured facial hair, totally Gen X.
Right. Totally Gen X. Yep,
that's us. So Hugh Jackman in particular, let's talk about him. So with his performance here, I actually didn't realize how great. I didn't think he was doing anything spectacular until X-24 came out, and then I was like, oh yeah, he's not a rickety old guy. He's acting, and I think he actually did a really spectacular job with what he brought to this movie.
Yes, I agree. I think this film coming out so early, there's part of me that's like, this was an Oscar caliber performance from him, because he's played this character so many times, and this time he played him so differently and so broken and so expressive. I think what really got me was some of the stuff in the third act, his interactions with Laura and his sort of admitting that he wanted to end his life and he's over, and just him playing those emotions with so few words and really all over his face. It really reminded me of Jeff Bridges in what is that? Walk the Line? No, not Walk the Line. I can't think of
Wild Heart.
Crazy Wild at Heart. Yeah, Wild at Heart. Crazy Heart. Yeah,
Crazy Heart.
Yeah, it just kind of reminded me of, here's someone who's lived a life, and I thought it was an Oscar worthy, at least for a nomination type thing. I would love for that to happen. He and Patrick Stewart to both be nominated, but I don't think that's going to happen just because it's a comic book movie that's coming out in early March, But who knows? Mad Max made the distance, so.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, I really enjoyed him, and it reminded me of why I like him so much in in other movies that don't involve Wolverine. I mean, Prisoners, and I think he does some fantastically interesting things when he's not in Wolverine makeup, though he largely owes his success to his role in Wolverine. I think he's a really interesting actor, and that's another reason I think it'd be great to see him not do any more of this kind of stuff. But I'm totally with you on fighting himself. I thought that was the pivot for me too, when you get to see him, young him, as well as the old man. I thought he was just great.
Yeah, he's been in 11. This is a quick count just from running through IMDb. He's been in 11 different X movies as Wolverine.
Wow,
over 17 years.
That is stunning to think about.
Yeah,
there's and interestingly enough, there's a game that I've played once where trying to find actors. I think they were all actors that had participated fully in 2 different trilogies. And you could argue that within those 11 movies, there may be at least 2 different trilogies, just as him being that one character,
right.
Which I think is, I just think it's fantastic. It's really neat to see him embody the character like that. Patrick Stewart, I thought throughout the film, he was the real star. What he was doing was spectacular, especially he brought an interesting drama to his role as being completely incapable of doing anything, and he also brought comic relief to what he was doing. He gave us a different tone, and I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, I really liked with both these characters. I think part of the richness of their performances is seeing them play these characters so many times. And it's neat to see this version of Professor X not only kind of broken and senile, but he lost. I mean, he's haunted by this tragedy that we don't know the details of, but we know he's done something horrific and basically destroyed his entire X-Men enterprise, And so it's neat seeing him play that. But then also trying to be the hopeful Professor X that we know. He's the one, he befriends Laura. He convinces Logan that to go on this road trip. And even when he knows it will bring certain death at their door, he wants to just enjoy this quiet dinner with a family. And it was just a fantastic performance for... to juxtapose, here's 2 men who have lost it all, but one is completely cynical and just wants to leave and get on the boat, and the other just still wants to go at it and still believes in the world. And I really like the way Patrick Stewart played that.
I think he brings his old man, Ebenezer Scrooge to this role, and that's one of our, family favorites. So, it sort of feels like, every time Logan walks in, it's the ghost of Christmas past, and I kind of get it, and so it was old home week every time they walked into that old.
Oh no, when we first see Charles sort of just cruising around, muttering to himself. And we question whether he's really there at all mentally, especially when Logan puts him in his bed and he says something, you don't know what you're talking about. And he says, oh no, I know you. It's just sometimes I don't recognize you, to give us some insight into his mind of that. Sometimes he's there and sometimes he's not all there. And we see that, throughout, and, looking at both these characters who are being slowly eaten away from the inside, with Charles, the question, my daughter and I discussed is it Alzheimer's? Is it something else? Is it just that his powers are waning? And we also have Logan, who's, his healing, ability is greatly diminished. And there's something, at his core that's also dying or rotten. So we've got two characters that there's something, crippling them from inside that, you look at their two strengths, the things that were their identities. Charles can't control his mind. He has these seizures that cause devastating effects to people around him. And Logan, who relied upon his ability to heal, and that doesn't happen. They both are just, sort of shadows of the people they were. And it's this, one last adventure, that Charles is grasping onto as he is able to locate, Laura, to see that there is still some light. There is still some hope for him that the mutants could carry on. Whereas, Logan's questioning, the early days of the mutants was that they were the next evolution of mankind. And now he questions, that there are no new mutants for the past, several years. Maybe we were a mistake. We were God's mistake. We weren't supposed to be here, and we're being eliminated, from them being, as Pete said, being, thought of as gods to now being these, cast-offs. I mean, it's a powerful start to the story. And I think it's, these two, I'm happy for this to be their last film, because I don't think there is more that I could ask of either of them to do with these characters. They were just handed stellar scripts, and arcs for these characters that I think any actor would say, I'm happy to walk away from this, because it gave them a great opportunity to just probe the depths of these men.
That's a really interesting point, Steve, too. And I one of the things that hit me just briefly in terms of a character effect, Wolverine's healing power has always been a thing that he could just trust. It would just work, and therefore we just trusted it. It just worked. I loved the sequence in the bathroom when he's expelling the bullets from his shoulder, and he was grunting and forcing the bullets out like it was a muscle that he had not exercised in a long time, right? And I thought that was a really sort of subtle but powerful demonstration of the frailty of sort of man, right? He's coming to terms with this that he's never had to deal with. He's always lived with pain, but he's never, he's still sort of come to terms now with the fact that he is broken.
The one thing he's always had is his resilience, and he's a little less. Yeah, that's a great point. And same with, it's to Steve's point with Professor X. I mean, here's someone he's never, he hasn't had his body hasn't worked properly since the Cuban Missile Crisis, if depending on what storyline. But it's always been about his mind and his powerful mind, and for him to lose his mind and for it to cost him everything, I thought was a great place to take the character. Like, how do you end Professor X in this how do you give him a sort of melancholy swan song? Well, he outlives all his X-Men. He doesn't get what he wants. When you look at like the entirety of the arguments between he and Magneto, he seems to have been wrong the entire time. He's like, oh yes, we just have to convince them. And at the end, nope, the government's too scared of mutants, and they wipe them all out, and he's the last of his kind. I thought that was just an interesting place for that character to end up.
I mean, yeah, and you mentioned before with the political landscape, it's an interesting question that everybody's thinking about one way or another in the drama that the X-Men has always put on us, the embracing or the expelling of other.
Oh yeah,
isn't
that an interesting aspect
so
of the story as well, that it's set in 2029 and to be set in Texas along the border, and the future that this film is sort of foretelling for us of, as Logan is driving his Uber limo, he's got, at some 20-somethings, celebrating, standing outside the sunroof, USA, USA, chanting, as they're driving along the military outposted border there, and the relations that we see with the wall down there, and just looking at Oklahoma City becoming like almost a Las Vegas type, to see where this film is really projecting where America goes. And I think that was very interesting to look at the larger scope of the world that the story takes place in, because the villains in the film, it's that Transigen corporation that's basically on its own quest to create its own mutants, to create its own next, weapon for the military to keep America safe again.
Exactly. A corporation assisted by a government to just do whatever they want. And Logan's his character. I can ignore it and just drive my Uber, or pay attention to these people who are being affected by this. Yeah, it was neat as well. Very topical. Just the entire point of the story. There's no MacGuffin. There's no big bad to kill. The entire point of the story was to help people who are persecuted get out of the United States. And there's something so topical about that. I felt like it was the most on point of all the X movies since that scene in X2 where Bobby comes out to his parents. They were really, as that was topical in 2003, this just felt very
for the climax to be a race to the border at Canada, to have the kids the kids on the run to the border with the military there to stop them, and to have Richard
Mexican
Grant
kids too.
Basically saying we have to stop them before they get to the border, because then they've got amnesty over there. Was just
the Mexican kids too. The border wall is America, dummies. It's awful.
Yeah,
it is. But my first thing, the first words that came to my head was, as we're making this joke and we're laughing, I want to say, well, that's too soon.
No.
To make those jokes. It's not. No. It's actually
it's all we have left, JJ. Right. It's all we have.
Exactly.
This is a cautionary tale.
That's right. That's right. I didn't even know that before we started talking about it.
Yeah. No, I don't think they knew that when they were making it.
No,
or maybe they did, and maybe that's the point. So, opposite for those two guys, for Hugh and Patrick Stewart, we have Daphne Keane playing Laura. This was her first movie.
Oh, great.
Oh.
How? I mean, and of course, she's so young. I said this to Pete, actually, as we were walking out of the movie, that I didn't realize how young she was until she spoke. And then I was blown away by... really, actually, kind of. I'll just say her performance. I was very happy. She did exactly what she was asked, I feel, and wow, I'm really excited for her and what she did with this role.
I thought what she did was, it was a very physical performance, which you don't really see child actors. Child actors tend to act using just dialogue. They say cute things, and that's what you get out of them. But her performance was really all about a physical presence, and she was feral, and very dangerous. There's a time she made me at ease. It's like, oh, what's she gonna do? Is she gonna spring to life and kill a bunch of people or try and stab Logan? I thought she was fantastic, and it was really neat to see her finally talk so late into the movie.
I thought she was interesting casting, because there was one point when Charles says to Logan, because Logan's denying, this whole there's mutants, and he's like, well, look at her, who does she remind you of? And I swear, if you look at her and you look at Famke Janssen, who played Jean Grey, I have to think there was some intentional casting to really look at that character Laura as Logan, but to see shadows of his true love there in that kid. I don't know. Maybe I'm just projecting things on there that I want to be true for this story to have some emotional resonance. But when I look at pictures of those two actresses side by side, I see a lot of physical similarities.
Their IMDb photos definitely look that way, for sure.
Definitely. I didn't notice that.
So some of the other cast members too. Pete, you mentioned something about Stephen Merchant. He was Caliban.
I like Stephen Merchant. He's a fine and funny lad, and it was delightful to see him as this giant sort of wandering albino houseman. He has been a favorite of mine, as just in terms of a comedian. He was a writer on The Office for many years. He worked a lot with Ricky Gervais and was behind Life's Too Short. So he's been around for a long time, but mostly he's done a fantastic podcast, which is hysterical, is the Gervais podcast. And I think that, I don't know where it is now. I think for a while you had to pay for it. It was a weird kind of experiment, but his role on that show was a riot. So I just think he's a very funny guy. It was a treat to see him in the show doing something that was, in the vein of No Small Parts. Like it was it was an important role, and it absolutely gave us sort of opened the door to the relationship between Logan and Xavier. And I thought he did a fantastic job. It reminded me so much of Mad Max, though, the way they dressed him, just in terms of the design of his character and wandering.
He looked a little like Bruce Pence.
Yeah, a little bit, right?
Yeah, the whole car chase there in that compound down on the border just, to me, was just like this whole Mad Max thing. And I kept that in the back of my mind to the point where when Logan gets to the Eden Project there, I said, oh, please don't let this be Mad Max Thunderdome. Please let this not be Mad Max Thunderdome with the children and the old man. And they definitely redeemed it from that.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that too, because the Reavers, so Pierce and Macon and those the characters, the cyborgs that are out there, are originally from the original material. They're actually based in Australia. So that's an interesting, weird potential thing there. Yeah, and the first time that the X-Men meet the Reavers, they're in Australia and they battle down there. So that's kind of a weird thing. I never thought of it as a Mad Max thing, but there are definitely some crossovers there. Eric LaSalle, I thought he was great. I thought he was very friendly. Like, to have his presence come in there as the friendly sort of do-gooder. What was he, a corn farmer? Is that what he was doing there? I thought it was great, and his death, which I'll bring up, was indicative of the graphic nature of the film to me. And I would use his death as the kind of thing to say, this movie is just going to throw violence and death and stuff at you. And yeah, here's Eric LaSalle. And 7 minutes later, he's dead. So I like that. And I like that he was there and that he was a part of this movie.
Yeah, I felt like this is probably the part of the film where I would imagine a lot of people thinks the film, if the movie drags, and it is a little too long, but I'm okay with it. But this is the part of the film where everything kind of slows down and let's just have a little emotional moment. I really liked Eric LaSalle and his family, and just that, as Xavier says, one of the best nights he's had in years. And I like when films find that time to bring out the heart. It was, that said, it was incredibly shocking to see, especially starting with his teenage son just getting slashed by X-24. Incredibly shocking to see that happen to the family. But also that's where the story was headed, and that's the story that they're telling. So, I don't know if it would be something I would complain or want changed, but it was definitely something that was just like, oh, this is so
well,
tragic.
I think the further tragedy is, Eric LaSalle comes out to the rescue, at the last minute there after he's, been wounded, and he drives the truck and he's got a shotgun and shoots some guys. And then he points, this gun at Logan and fires, but it's empty. And there's just, I think this revelation that you see just sort of cross Logan's face of, this family that he thought, that had been a safe house for them. But, again, it's reaffirming he's an outsider. There's who should have been his savior was willing to kill him, to fire at him. And I think that, again, the emotional arc there, it added some depth and layers to that I hadn't anticipated, that just sort of lifted this movie above and beyond what I think many people are expecting it to be.
That was really deep, Steve, and I applaud that, because all I could think of was Eric LaSalle as Daryl Jenks in Coming to America.
Oh, gosh.
And I found myself thinking, my goodness, why doesn't he have the Jerry curls? That's all I could think about. This movie would have been so much different.
It's just because you guys just did Coming to America.
That's totally right. We just did it. And Andy and I weren't as crazy about that movie as we once were. But Eric LaSalle's Jerry curls were
still the highlight.
Yeah, still a highlight. Yeah,
that holds up.
That holds up. That holds up. Yes,
his 80s hairstyle.
JJ, you didn't talk about Richard Grant.
Yeah.
El Machina del Oro, the gold machine. I'll torture you so long you'll think it's a career.
I will say,
He's a good bad guy.
I like Richard Grant, but I don't think he read the script. I think he thought he was doing another Wolverine movie. Like he's like, oh, Wolverine movie. Okay, I've seen the Origins one, and he came in and hammed it up. I was like, no, this isn't that. This isn't that.
Come back.
We're all dialing it down.
Richard Grant is so great and so talented, and he's sort of an on-off guy. Like there's not a lot of gray in Richard Grant. He is so wonderful and so funny, and I totally agree with you. He's a little out. I just can't talk about a movie with Richard Grant in it and not talk about my favorite film, my favorite guilty pleasure film, I should say, of all time, Hudson Hawk. So there you go. My piece has been spoken.
Darnell, what did you want to say about Boyd Holbrook, Pierce, lead cyborg?
I really liked him. I liked the idea of the Reavers, these people who augment themselves. It would be hard to pull off I felt like he did a good job of doing what could have been a very generic villain. I thought, he was the right amount of just sort of douchey, and like he made his entire crew just so every time Laura or Logan like sliced up his men, you're just like, yeah, you guys are jerks. And I think I've never seen him in anything before, but I just really liked his swagger, and like, I don't know, I thought he played it neat, and in the hands of a lesser actor, that would have been a very dull villain, which is, the biggest problem in these superhero movies are usually bad villains.
Well, it was an interesting foil too to the Wolverine because, he wasn't scared. Right. And that yet again is another element that sort of demonstrates the frailty of Wolverine.
The reason why I didn't think of remarking about him is because I didn't really get wasn't able to take that leap with it. So he wasn't scared, and I didn't understand why he wasn't scared, because he didn't, other than his confidence being sort of embodied in the role, the character didn't really have power, didn't have an ability to be that. And it seemed like the power that he should have, or the confidence that he should have, would be from his crew. And his crew is regularly getting disemboweled throughout this film, constantly. Like, he should have some measure of what the heck am I going to do when I get on the face here? But no, he just keeps making cyborgs, I guess.
I thought some of it was I thought it was a little bit of hubris. Yes. I mean, he made a couple of comments about, it's almost like he grew up post-mutants. So it's almost like, sorry to make it topical and political again, but in today's world, how younger people maybe don't quite understand the threat of Russia. And it's just like, oh, you don't remember the Cold War. That's adorable. And he's sort of that, I don't know, he seemed like that person who's like, I'm not scared of mutants because I don't remember that time Magneto destroyed the Golden Gate Bridge. That was before I was born. All I know is I helped kill mutants, and I'm wicked.
So
I'm a winner.
The interesting thing about the character of Pierce, and I'm making big leaps here probably, is that, so when they're in Oklahoma City, Charles and Laura are watching the movie Shane. And I think that's an important sort of tie-in to this movie, because I think I have to admit, I haven't seen Shane. I'm familiar with the story, but when you see that this footage they're showing from Shane shows a scene where he's got a shootout with a villain played by Jack Palance, who is got a black glove on his right hand, which is a very noticeable costuming choice. You've got this black hand wielding a gun, and you look at Pierce, and it's his right hand that is his mechanical hand that's almost it's a grayish metal. So I see some parallels there visually that I think that I'm assuming they were making in terms of Shane, sort of the loner outside gunman coming in to help the town, facing down the villain with the black hand, and the same thing happening here with Logan. So it's something that I just thought is sort of one of those symbolic or thematic, echoes across the films that I thought was an interesting choice. And I have to say, it's the coolest hand ever because his fingers flex backwards as well.
That was the best.
That was cool.
That's pretty rad.
Yeah. And his soft touch fingertips.
Oh.
You could flip pages
how else
with
you
those
going to log into your iPhone? They had little fingerprints on them. That was great.
That's true.
Yeah, you got to flip pages of a book with those fingers.
That's right.
Lick your robot finger.
Don't
turn
lick the
page.
robot fingers. You don't want your tongue stuck in the gear of your pinky.
Ugh. Yeah. Well, that kind of jumps us up to effects. If we talk about that as being some of the stuff that they were making us, that they're having us see what we were doing there. I think we talked mostly about the makeup as being a big thing that was effect. When Logan was on the operating table or laying down and seeing his gored body. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really spectacular effects.
Yeah,
really spectacular makeup.
That reminded me of An American Werewolf in London, like a classic Rick Baker stuff. That was really well done.
I think they shouldn't have had him. I think they shouldn't have had him move on the table because I thought it looked so good until he moved.
Yes, I agree.
And then he bent his body in kind of a funny way, and you're like, oh, that's I get it.
Fake, right.
There was a lot of little scarring on his face too. I mean, a lot of just subtle, scarring. He looked really weather beaten. And I think in terms of the makeup, you've got the money shot of the gored torso, but I think it's just the little detail work as well. Even little things that I noticed that I thought in the first half, it's like his eyes always look like they're bloodshot. It's just those little things
always
that it just adds to the cloudy eyes, bloodshot, little spidery scars all across his face, neck, and torso. Just such fine detail work that I think just added to that. He's so grizzled and just which was funny because during the previews or pre-show stuff, there was advertisements and our theater shows like interviews with promotional stuff, and there's an interview with Hugh Jackman, and my daughter looks at me, she says, he doesn't look as old as he looks in the trailer. He doesn't look that old. I'm like, that's the makeup there.
Exactly.
It's the whole idea of he's worn out, he's done. And I think the makeup really conveyed that. What
was neat too is when he took the super drug at the end, those blemishes went away, those bullet scars and stuff like that. That was a neat little detail too.
I loved the breaking of the mechanics of the blades. I found myself really fixating when he was pulling the blade out and pushing it around. That was great.
Yeah, that feels. I mean, that's very practical with everything. So I was going to mention the cinematography before. I was actually really impressed with the motion control work, especially during the escape from the compound, where you were doing a lot of fishtailing with the Uber truck. Okay. And that whole scene. So there were some of my favorite shots of the film were when we were watching the vehicle from behind, and the camera is panning left, but it's actually panning right as the dolly moves left, and so you get this sort of odd weightless feeling as you see the car fishtail in front of you, and you're going contrary to the motion that you're in. I like that kind of stuff, and you don't really see that a whole lot, that at least that I'm familiar with, because a lot of times people don't want to go contrary with the pan and the motion. So I was happy that they did that. As far as and in the fight scenes, when I was in the theater, I thought it was kind of creaky. I don't know. I was worried that some of the stuff felt sped up or a little weird, especially the kids doing their fighting. But when I think about it in review, I think it was really great. It felt kind of raw to me.
Well, that's the part that I had a little bit of trouble with. I think it's not because that sequence didn't do well for me, right, in terms of just a straight up action sequence. But it felt just such a tonal shift. All the kids running through the woods, like the great sort of hunt. It felt like a James Patterson thing, and I didn't quite. I just felt like I lost the thread of the rest of the film, and that's what I mean. Like the first and second acts are such isolationist stories. You know what I mean? It's just about, here are these guys, they're alone in the world, and I feel like the third act is about the redemption and finding the next generation, and it's all great. But there were so many of them and so much of it, and I was totally okay with it just being about the girl. And so I wasn't crazy. Once they found the kids in the fire watchtower, I sort of lost the thread a little bit of what I felt made the first two acts so special.
Yeah, and from an effects standpoint, having that many mutant powers from a movie where really the only effects, visual effects you're really seeing are blades coming out of their hands. seeing these mutant powers kind of manifest is like, oh, okay, we're back a little bit with, you know, fake vines and the one that froze off the guy's arm, and it was just like, oh, okay, we're in an X-Men movie.
Although I have to say that Vine one, I have a particular soft spot for. That's one of my very favorites.
As far as the way to take someone out, like,
well, it's just death? Really, I find myself damn terrified about it. Like, I've done photo shoots where I've shot people that are having vines creeped in their skin, and I find it so terrifying that I have to fixate on it, or else I will nightmare on it over and over. That is so scary to me.
And I'm sure that was a really fine line for them to walk, about the idea of having all these young mutants together, and what do we do with them? We, you know, leading up to the fight, I was thinking they've only shown us the Ice Girl's power and the Lizard Boy's, you know, look. They haven't shown us anything else. And for a while in that fight, I thought that's all we were going to get, because they were going to stay true to those first two acts in what the movie was. I think that's a really, and for me, I was hoping to see more, but I totally get the feeling of, yeah, maybe we shouldn't. You know, maybe we should hold off and save that for the X-Force movie that's coming down the line. So that's interesting. Any other production stuff that you guys want to talk about? Anything post-production that's interesting to you?
I thought the score was really neat. You know, it was a little bit of mix of Western, but then it had some sort of crazy notes to it during some of the action scenes. It was supposed to be Cliff Martinez, who did, you know, Drive and Solaris, two of my favorite scores. So I was kind of looking forward to his work, but I really like the final work in that. It was pretty good, pretty unique.
The person listed on IMDb is Marco Beltrami.
Yes, and I looked at some of his other films that he's scored, and nothing that really wowed me. But I've been listening to his score for Logan today, and it just really captured for me the tone of the mood and atmosphere of the film really well. And I think it was supported by the visuals, it's supported by the story. It's a nice compliment that it just really melded well together. And then to have, I think that, you know, Johnny Cash song during the end credits was just really finished everything off really well.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll say about Marco is he also did do the score for the Wolverine. So I think it's interesting, we look at, you know, the way that we've kind of positioned this movie in getting it made, and what it means with having this whole group that really worked on the Wolverine, and whether it was standalone or not, it kind of feels like they let them pull their shackles off a little bit coming here and make it in an artful way that's different from what we're used to seeing in comic book movies, because a lot of the people are still involved. So as good or bad as we feel about the Wolverine from the different things that were there was more that they had to do, and I think they brought it in a very serious way to this movie.
I don't think we can underscore, you know, the role that Beltrami has had. I mean, look at the films that he has done, that the franchises that he is a regular part of, right? Die Hard, he did 3:10 to Yuma, he did, I mean, talk about a sort of a Western vibe, but he's done, I think, all the Screams, The Thing, World War Z, Snowpiercer. We've talked about him on this show a number of times, and so, you know, he's a regular, and I'm with you, Steve, too. I haven't listened to the whole thing all the way through yet, but I poked around at it earlier, and I think it's great. The thing I worry about, I didn't remember the score when I walked out of the theater, and I think that's you know, it's kind of a perennial challenge these days. But
yeah,
it's a great
it's missing
score.
a hummable theme. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Yeah, there were some neat Easter eggs too. I noticed in the beginning. I noticed Wolverine's his katana sword from the Wolverine from Japan, sitting there collecting dust, and I thought I saw. I don't know if you guys saw a copy of the Once and Future King. Sitting next to Xavier's plants. I thought I might have. I thought I saw that. Now I want to see the movie again.
Yeah,
but there were neat connections. I thought with that.
I know there were more Easter eggs that I was not aware of, but I felt like the Deadpool thing in the beginning was so full of Easter eggs. If you'd have removed them, it would not have existed.
Right. Yeah.
Well, right. And the coming soon Nathan Summers is the one that I talk about the most, because that's a big character in the world that they're going to. It's a character called Cable, who's also cloned into Cable's a good guy, kind of, and he's cloned into a bad guy named Strife. And, the next kind of what we're doing is moving into New Mutants, X-Force, all that stuff coming up. That's where they're going with this. So
the deep
really
cut.
neat to see that.
Yeah,
the deep cut. Numbers. Pete, did you put these down here? The Fox guidance for the weekend?
I did.
Is that from you?
I did. I was trying to do
What do
my
you see?
part, man. Andy's gone.
Thank
I got to
you.
step up. No, you know what?
Right.
What I know, and Andy's so much better at this. So, grain of salt. What I have heard is that Fox guidance for the weekend was 60 million. Box Office Mojo predicts 74 million by end of day Sunday, putting it in number one position for the weekend box office takes, and number one for weekend box office takes in 2017 so far. So probably short-lived, but a strong showing. In terms of X-Men openings, this would put Logan at number 5. Over the last 18 years. Budget, I read the budget was 97. I think, JJ, you pulled out 127 from IMDb. This was Variety reporting 97. I assume the gap is in prints and advertising. There's a lot I think we don't know right now. So about just in terms of the budget. And I don't run Andy's spreadsheet, so I'm not even going to try to give you adjusted profit per finished minute on this film.
Well, and when you first, when I saw that Logan was number 5, I thought that felt like a low number considering what we're doing here. But when you consider how many X movies they are, we talked about 11 that were listed. That's actually pretty good for a really good setup for Logan. So
yeah, I have a useless number. This is already number 40 in the IMDb top 250. So pointless number, but people are loving it.
People are loving it. That's the important one.
People are loving it. Yeah, and I think that there's something like a 95% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which is super high too. So,
yeah,
good stuff. I assume because Tommy's not with us today that none of you guys wrote a song for Flickchart today.
I heard Darnell did, and he's going to sing it right now.
Oh. Ooh. On the spot.
Oof, nope. No, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, new kid.
I was gonna try. I had something coming, and then there was like nothing.
Then nothing is. I jinxed it.
Yeah, nothing. Logan.
I'm excited.
Yep. There we go.
That actually sounded like a Western. Our Flickchart is our place for our special stack rankings for the film board, and you can find it at flickchart.com/TNR Film Board. Check it out to see where your preferences match or veer from ours and start your own ranked list today. One of the interesting things that I found, another kind of random number, is there's a site called comicbook.com, and they have comic book composite rankings, which are generally what people find about these comic book movies. There's more than 100 films there. Logan is currently number 2 on that list, behind The Dark Knight. Wow. So I'm excited to see where it ends for us. Pete, do you have the keys to the kingdom?
I
on
do.
This right now?
I have broken into
Excellent.
Andy's house and I'm ready to go. Number 1, let's here we go. Logan versus The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug.
Logan.
Logan.
And Logan for me. How about Logan versus Dawn of the Planet of the Apes?
I stay with Logan.
Same, Logan.
Yeah, Logan.
Yeah, hands down, Logan. How about, here you go, gentlemen, Logan versus Guardians of the Galaxy.
Ooh.
I'm going to say Guardians.
No, come on. Guardians has no weight. Yes, it's fluffy fun, but if you, I'm sorry, to me, I will always side with, yes, Guardians is light, but it's empty calories. It's a candy bar. Logan is something that you're going to sit down, you're going to watch it again, and it's going to give you something to think about. It's going to give you something to resonate with those characters. It's going to sit with you and not let go of you for quite some time.
I cried for Groot too, and I will say that it's literally the gore in Logan that pulls me out of it. For this one, in this comparison, I think they do more with less in Guardians.
Wow, this is a really hard one because Guardians is a movie I've seen several times. I got to go Logan. This is the culmination of 18 years of X-Men storytelling, and it couldn't have gone better for me. I mean, yeah, it's too long. There's little issues, but wow, I got to go Logan.
Yeah, I almost feel like this is, what is the Academy Award for, like, you stuck it out the longest?
A Character Lifetime Achievement Award for Wolverine, yeah.
Lifetime Achievement Award. There you go. This is the Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah, Logan. We should have won several times, but we gave it to Meryl Streep.
That's right. So I'm going to go with Logan as well. And that takes us to Logan versus Kingsman, the Secret Service.
Oh boy.
Kingsman.
No. Because again, yes, Kingsman was enjoyable fun, but again, I think it's lighter, and to me, this one sits heavier, and I will always take that over the light fun. And yeah, Kingsman, yes, gory, violent, good time, but the story that to me it speaks to generations. Gen X, this is your story.
Steve, I'm looking for light.
Yeah,
wherever
you're not
I
going to
can
find it here. Come
okay?
on, this is 2017. Come on, look at what we've done so far. What have we done? We did Split. We did what? It's a dark. Get out. It's a dark, heavy year.
Yeah.
You're getting no relief, Justin. Yeah. No relief.
I'm trying.
Yeah, I gotta go. Right. I gotta go Logan. I love Kingsman, but I gotta go Logan.
I am also Logan. Wow, I know, right? I'm a little bit surprised on that too. That takes us to Logan versus Gravity.
Oh,
whoa, Gravity.
Logan, easy Logan. Gravity. If you're not watching it in the theater in 3D,
that was exactly my experience. I watched it again not long ago, and it did not have that same. Dare I say?
Yeah, I haven't had that experience.
Gravity. Yeah, I'm on board with Logan.
Wow.
It's a powerful story.
Oh, you guys, Logan.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Or Star Wars: The Force Awakens.
Force Awakens.
Logan.
Really?
Only because Force Awakens. I like the characters, but that is a remake of A New Hope, and it cannot be forgiven.
Fair.
Oh no, it's
okay.
No, it's Star Wars: The Force Awakens. There was such joy. Okay, JJ, there's your light, and it's the last dying light of 2016. Or was that 2015? That was 2015. Sorry,
that was
2015.
Yeah.
The last glowing light in my heart.
It's okay.
For The Force Awakens.
Due to the nature of Flickchart, as we have discovered time and time again, because we don't get to rank against every movie in the list, it tends to jump in a bit of a maybe a haphazard fashion. So right now, well, let me just ask you before I tell you where it landed. What would you say if I said Logan versus Edge of Tomorrow?
Oh.
This is just a thought experiment. Just a thought experiment.
Edge of Tomorrow.
No, I'll take Logan. I'll take a good old standby Western,
I'd probably take Logan too. This is hard. These are all great movies, but
it's nitpicking at this point.
Except for Desolation of Smog.
Yeah, that was an easy one. I'm with you guys. I think I'm leaning toward Logan. I don't know if that's because it's fresh and I really enjoyed it. Right now this weekend, that feels legit to me. I'm glad it landed that way because Logan skipped Edge of Tomorrow in order to jump over Gravity to land at number 2 on our flick chart for this board. That's right. So Star Wars Force Awakens, Logan, Gravity, Edge of Tomorrow, Kingsman, The Secret Service, and Get Out. And Split. Look at that. This
3
year,
films.
Split, Get Out, and Logan, 3 films cracked the top 10 on our list.
Off to a good start.
Good picks.
Yeah.
What this tells me is that you guys should always pick our editorial calendar, and I should have nothing to do with it. Because I'm too terrified. Great. So, letterboxd rankings. We got numbers 1 through 5. Half numbers do count. I could go. It's a 3.5 for me.
It's a 4.5 for Steve.
Wow.
Darnell says 4.5 as well.
I say 4.5 as well. That takes us to a 4.25.
4.25. That's pretty solid. But it is interesting that this number 2 on our chart, that no one was comfortable taking the leap and going to a 5-star ranking. I'm not trying to say anything by that. I just think that's interesting that it's that high on the chart in that way. 4.25. That's great. So what's next? We are going to go to the circle way at the end of April. That's our next film board. We did back-to-back weeks this week with Get Out and then here with Logan. We've got some time before the circle, but I'm really excited for this movie. Did you guys see the trailer at your Logan screening?
Oh, yeah, you were with me.
Yes. Well, I know you did.
Did you see that
Steve,
trailer,
Darnell?
JJ? It was awesome.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, I didn't see the trailer at all.
I avoid trailers, but I am intrigued because it is directed by James Ponsoldt, who did The Spectacular Now, which is a tremendous film, and The End of the Tour,
right.
which is, I think, a really interesting film if you're a lit nerd and a fan of David Foster Wallace, and the fact that I went to college in Central Illinois. I had a lot of connections with this, but some pretty solid work. So I'm interested to see where he goes with The Circle, because I am not a fan of the novel. I got about halfway through and just sort of gave up on it because it was spinning its wheels. So I'm interested to see where the film goes.
Wow.
Well, I've been intrigued more by the trailer. I wasn't super excited on the front end. I wanted to connect this to the novel, but the trailers are actually getting me more excited, and understandably, because of who I am, I'm terrified at what it's going to reveal. Because again, that's what we're doing this year in 2017 for the weekly show, for the Mothership show. Pete, you guys just wrapped on Zhang Yimou, right?
We did our Zhang Yimou series. We had a fantastic conversation on The Immigrants, which was a listener's choice episode. Actually, as you listen to this, that is coming this week. We're recording a whole bunch of stuff out of order because I am about to leave the country for a few weeks.
To go to the Great Wall.
Yeah, to go visit the Great Wall. That's right. And so
Awesome.
the one that we're in the middle of recording right now that will be going live over the month of March is our Hughes Brothers series, which has been so much fun. We've got Menace to Society, From Hell, and The Book of Eli. What a great trio of movies that represents a great variety of what those guys have done.
Book of Eli. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And those come out when? When will people be hearing that in their feeds?
Oh, through March. I don't know the exact date. It's coming up.
All right.
That's
cool.
great. I'll look out for those. I love Menace to Society.
Oh,
Yeah.
that was solid. Yeah.
All right, well, wrapping this up, Darnell, it's been great to have you on the show. Totally fun. Two very different kinds of movies. Will you come back and hang out with us again sometime soon?
Absolutely. It's great to sit here with these two really good movies and talk to you guys about it. So I'll definitely be back, but only for a great movie. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, we'll be sure to get the crappy ones next time.
You've been super lucky. We have had other
So
guests on
lucky.
the show before that have been sitting with us with crap stuff. So these movies, man.
Now, Darnell, did you accompany Tommy to see Child 44 last year?
No, he saw that
Okay.
by himself.
So you really just leave the junk for him, and you take the quality stuff.
Yep,
Okay,
that's pretty much
I'm
it.
down with that. That's
good. The only bad one was Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I had to hold his hand through that one. But other than that, I mean, this has been a lucky couple of weeks. Is these last between Get Out and Logan? These have been good. I swear I have more opinions than it was great. I loved it. So
Better than Cats.
Yeah, I definitely look forward to coming back sometime.
Well, thanks, Darnell. We totally appreciate it. And Steve, great job as always, man. Thanks.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be back.
And Pete, we're having coffee next week?
No, I won't be here next week.
Are you going to
will be-
China,
You will be
JJ?
dining alone.
I meant in China. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, it's good hanging out with you guys tonight. And thank you to you out there in the audience for indulging us with our Logan bloodlust. We love it when you hang out with us. Share us and share us again so we can make it a big movie party for everyone out there. And as we said, the Film Board will return in late April with The Circle. When the movie ends, our conversation begins. Till next.